I've got a horrible feeling that when I wrote my book Deadly Daddy, I didn't follow the rules, which is to say, I did not give my sources. And when it came to Lebensborn, my sources were library books, i.e. books taken from the National borrowed from the National Library in Wales. Perhaps somewhere in my book I have the titles and the authors, and the page numbers, and Christ knows. At the moment, the book is there, but I would have to read all of it to find my references to Lebensborn, because the option to search for a particular word is not there anymore, thanks to computer repair people. Lebensborn, here is what I remember about Lebensborn, and it has stuck. There was nothing benevolent about it. It sounded so benevolent in the video I've just seen. What was it, 4 minutes or so? It was not benevolent in any way, shape or form. True to say that some of the young mothers were volunteers, i.e. girls who had been brainwashed by Hitler Youth into believing that they had to produce babies for Hitler. Babies for Hitler. And I am going by memory, but it's something that stuck. These girls were basically put into SS brothels, which was a twofold purpose. Had a twofold purpose. Firstly, you have your Aryan sires of the children in the SS. Well, actually, it's more than that, isn't it? Secondly, they have their reward for being SS soldiers, which is to have sex with attractive young girls in a brothel. The girls weren't paid. So perhaps brothel isn't quite the right word, more like a rape farm. What did they call it in was it Bosnia? A rape camp, something like that. Although technically, as I say, these girls were volunteers and were later castigated by, I don't know, Catholics or whatever, for walking around with their Aryan babies, in prams. Of course, they weren't married because, in all probability, they didn't even know who the fathers were. How many SS men did they have to have sex with before they conceived? Then, I confess I don't know the sequence. These babies were not looked after by the state. They were taken from the young mothers and given to suitable Germanic families. That is a direct quote, suitable Germanic families. I'll have to find out where I'm quoting from, won't I? And any Germanic family would do, which is to say Aryan, blonde, blue-eyed, preferably looking rather like a Viking, actually, although I think they may have forgotten that a lot of Vikings are redhead, but there we go. The ideal was to look like a Viking, an Aryan, a Viking, a Scandinavian. If only it ended there. They also kidnapped blonde and blue-eyed girls from countries they'd invaded, Poland, for example, and forced them into these SS brothels, where these girls also had to have Aryan babies, also to be farmed out to suitable Germanic families. And it didn't end there. At the end of the war, there were babies who hadn't been suitably homed yet. And there were stories which appear to have been verified of babies left to freeze to death. And some babies were actually hanged. There were photographs in one book I looked at. But I can picture this extremely well. and it has imprinted itself on my memory. And when I can find the books from which I got this information, I will upload that too. If they haven't been removed by this present government, which is after all following exactly the same eugenics program that the Nazis followed. Exactly the same. First, you breed out the disabled, the mentally ill, the people they didn't consider suitable. And you breed in the children that I wanted. Admittedly, that program has gone awry, or at least it is not as it originally was. It's not a program about blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. But it's worth remembering there that the allies of the Germans were Islamic. Islam was much admired by Germany. So when the descendants of the Third Reich, Merkel and co., import vast numbers of Islamic peoples into Europe, perhaps the new program is to churn out a melting pot, perhaps to atone for past sins, perhaps to destroy any sense of national identity. It's the same program modified. I've also just read something that gave me pause for thought. SS men, if their wives could not produce Aryan-looking children, were free to find other women with whom to produce Aryan-looking children. Now, my father was in the vicinity of Karen's birth at the time of Karen's birth. His wife, judging by a photograph I've seen of her, was dark-haired. Mind you, my mother was brown-haired as well. I have to wonder what Karen looked like. I often wonder what Karen looked like, because as far as I'm concerned, she was my sister. And she was murdered. Did my father hang around just long enough to take a look at the baby and see if she qualified as Aryan? And when she didn't, did he then take off with my mother in the hope that she would produce Aryan-looking babies? Bit of a fail there, in the case of my brother, who had dark, wavy hair, but very, very blue eyes. So half successful. And I, in my turn, at birth certainly, total success. According to my father, I had golden ringlets, and my eyes were blue, but then of course all newborn babies' eyes, or virtually all newborn babies' eyes, are blue until they find their sort of natural colour. My older daughter's eyes were blue at birth, before turning hazel, more or less. I don't know how she would describe the colour of them today. To watch a video that made Lebensborn sound like some kind of benevolent program to assist unmarried mothers is exactly the same as describing the Magdalene laundries in that fashion.